I used to believe that the greatest battles in life came with warning signs, shadows before the storm, whispers before the betrayal. But the truth is, the most life-altering moments often arrive in silence, disguised as ordinary days. For me, it began with a simple envelope of rent money that wasn't enough. My name is Alina. 28, recently separated and stubbornly clinging to the idea that independence was worth the price. No matter how steep, I had left my husband 6 months earlier, walking away from a house that echoed with absence rather than love. The apartment I rented now wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. A single bedroom with creaking floors and paint that peeled like old secrets. It represented freedom but also fragility. Every bill was a reminder of how close I teetered on the edge. Daniel, my landlord, was unlike the others I'd met when searching for a place to live. He wasn't the kind to bark demands or hammer notices onto doors. Mid-40s, sharp eyes that seemed to notice more than he said. He carried himself with the calm assurance of someone who controlled his world, and, by extension, the worlds of those who rented from him. Our interactions had always been brief, polite exchanges about maintenance or paperwork. Nothing more. Until that evening. I remember standing in his doorway, the envelope trembling in my hand. Inside was most of the rent, but not all. My job at the cafe had cut hours again, and despite picking up extra shifts where I could, the math hadn't added up. I told myself I'd explain, that he would understand, that people miss payments all the time. But when he opened the door and looked at me, I felt stripped of excuses. It's not the full amount, I confessed, my voice barely steady. I'll have the rest soon, I promise. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he invited me in. His apartment was everything mine wasn't. Tidy, deliberate, suffused with the faint warmth of sandalwood. He set the envelope on the counter, counted the bills slowly, then lifted his gaze. You're short, he said simply. No accusation, no anger. Just a fact. I nodded, ashamed. I just need time. For a moment, I thought he'd dismiss me, tell me to figure it out like everyone else. Instead, he leaned back against the counter, arms folded, and studied me with unnerving patience. Alina, he said finally, life doesn't always give us time, but sometimes it gives us alternatives. The way he said it was neither cruel nor kind, but heavy with meaning I didn't yet understand. His words lingered, unsettling, as though he had just placed an invisible card on the table between us. And in that pause, that breath of silence, I realized this wasn't about missing rent anymore. Something else had begun, and I wasn't sure I was ready to face it. I left Daniel's apartment that evening with my thoughts rattling louder than the pipes in my own. His words, "Sometimes it gives us alternatives," played on repeat, cryptic and unsettling. I told myself I was overthinking, that he had only meant some flexible arrangement, maybe extra work around the property. Still, there had been something in the way he looked at me, as though he'd seen through my carefully constructed defenses. Back in my apartment, the silence pressed in. The walls felt closer, the air heavier. My independence, the very thing I had fought so hard to claim after leaving my marriage, suddenly seemed fragile, like glass balancing on the edge of a table. One wrong move, one missed payment, and everything could shatter. I thought of my ex-husband, Amir. He had provided financial stability, yes, but it came at the cost of affection. We had grown into strangers living under one roof, bound more by obligation than desire. Leaving him was supposed to be liberation, proof that I could shape my own life. But freedom came with bills, and bills didn't wait for broken hearts to heal. That night, I barely slept. Each creak of the building reminded me of Daniel's presence just one floor above. He wasn't an ordinary landlord, aloof, yes, but not indifferent. He spoke little, yet there was weight in everything he said. Even the other tenants seemed to carry a quiet respect, maybe even wariness when speaking about him. The next morning, I forced myself into the rhythm of work. At the cafe, I brewed coffee, wiped counters, smiled at strangers who didn't know that my life was fraying at the seams. But every quiet moment pulled me back to that envelope, to Daniel's calm, unreadable expression. When I returned home, another notice was waiting under my door. Bold red letters, Payment past due. My stomach nodded. It wasn't eviction yet, but the message was clear. I was running out of time. That evening, as I climbed the stairs with the notice in hand, I heard footsteps behind me. Daniel's voice followed, calm and unhurried. "Alina," he said, and I turned. His gaze dropped briefly to the paper in my grip, then back to my face. "You got my reminder." There was no malice in his tone, but no softness either. Just a statement, heavy with implication. I swallowed. "I'm trying. I really am." He studied me in silence for a long moment, and I felt the weight of his attention like a spotlight. Then he nodded toward his door. "Come upstairs. Let's talk." My pulse quickened. I wanted to refuse, to insist I could manage on my own. But deep down, I knew I couldn't. And as I followed him up the last few steps, I realized I was walking not only into his apartment again, but into a decision that could alter everything I thought I knew about myself. Daniel's apartment felt different this time. The lights were softer, the air tinged with the faint spice of sandalwood, like the room itself had been prepared for a conversation that wouldn't end with a simple, "I'll pay you later." He gestured toward the chair across from him, and I sat carefully, clutching the overdue notice in my hand as if it were a shield. "You're cornered." "Alina," he said without accusation. His voice was calm, even soothing, but the truth in his words left no room for denial. "You can't keep pushing this back. Sooner or later the numbers win." "I know," I admitted, my throat tight, "but I don't have anywhere else to go." He leaned forward, folding his hands. "That's why I'm offering you another way, a solution that doesn't involve eviction notices or late fees." The word solution carried weight, and I could feel the air between us shift. I tried to steady my voice. "What kind of solution?" His gaze lingered on me, not invasive, not leering, but steady enough to unravel the composure I'd been clinging to. "One that's personal," he said at last. "One night, my terms. In exchange, the debt disappears." The sentence landed like a stone in water, ripples spreading through every corner of my mind. Shame, anger, curiosity, temptation, all tangled at once. I wanted to tell him no, to stand, to walk out and slam the door behind me. But the words caught in my throat. "You think I can just—" I started, but he interrupted gently. "I think you're stronger than you realize," he said, his voice steady. "And I think you understand the choice in front of you." Silence filled the room, heavy and unyielding. My pulse thudded in my ears. The memory of my ex-husband surfaced, his coldness, his absence, the way intimacy had become a distant memory long before I left. The ache of that loneliness pressed against me now, merging with the weight of my financial desperation. "I'm not forcing you," Daniel added quietly. "If you walk out that door, nothing changes tonight. But tomorrow the notice becomes action. That's the reality." His words weren't cruel, but they were precise, honest. And perhaps that was what frightened me most. He wasn't pretending this was anything other than what it was, a transaction disguised as a choice. I gripped the paper until my knuckles whitened, torn between pride and survival. The longer I sat there, the more survival clawed its way to the surface. Finally, I whispered, "I need time to think." Daniel studied me for a moment, then nodded. "You have tonight. After that, the choice will make itself." I left his apartment with my heart pounding, the notice still clenched in my fist. The hallway stretched before me like a tunnel, long and dim, every step echoing the same unbearable truth. I wasn't just deciding how to pay my rent. I was deciding who I was willing to become. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Daniel's words replaying like a loop I couldn't escape. "One night, my terms. The debt disappears." Each syllable seemed to echo louder in the silence, burrowing into places I didn't want to acknowledge. By morning, exhaustion had hollowed me out. But the overdue notice on my nightstand was a harsher alarm than any clock. Bills weren't waiting. My landlord wasn't bluffing. And my options. Those had run out long before he spoke his offer aloud. When evening fell, I found myself standing once again outside his door. My hand hovered over the wood, trembling. A dozen times I nearly turned back. But survival is persuasive, and shame can only delay hunger and eviction for so long. The door opened before I could knock twice. Daniel stepped aside wordlessly, as though he had known I'd come. His apartment was dimly lit, shadows pooling in corners, a bottle of wine breathing on the table. He poured me a glass without asking, sliding it across to me. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "Just know what this means, and what it doesn't." His voice was calm, deliberate, but there was something else in his eyes. Not cruelty, not glee, but a steadiness that unnerved me. He wasn't begging. He wasn't manipulating. He was simply waiting. I sipped the wine, its bitterness sharp against my tongue. My pulse quickened when his hand brushed mine, and I didn't pull away. Somewhere deep inside, fear and curiosity braided together, tugging me forward. When his lips finally met mine, I froze, then surrendered. It wasn't what I expected. There was no roughness, no hurried greed. Instead, there was a strange gentleness, almost reverence, as though he understood the gravity of what I was giving up, or perhaps he simply knew how to disarm me completely. The hours that followed blurred into a haze of contradictions, shame and hunger, reluctance and release. I had crossed the line I swore I wouldn't, and yet part of me leaned into it, desperate for something I hadn't admitted I missed, the intimacy of being seen, of being wanted. When dawn finally crept through his curtains, I sat up in tangled sheets, pulling the blanket around me. My heart raced with questions I couldn't answer. Daniel stirred beside me, his voice low. "No late fees. No eviction. We're square." His words should have brought relief. Instead, they hollowed me out further, because it wasn't just rent I had traded, it was a piece of myself, bargained away in silence. And yet, the most unsettling truth lingered like a shadow I couldn't ignore. A part of me hadn't felt forced. A part of me had chosen this. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a rhythm that looked ordinary from the outside but carried an invisible fracture beneath. I went to work at the cafe, exchanged small talk with customers, returned home to the apartment I had nearly lost. To anyone watching, I was surviving, maybe even thriving, but inside I felt like a puzzle whose pieces no longer fit the same way. Daniel kept his word. The rent was never mentioned again, and no threats of eviction arrived. Our interactions were oddly unchanged during the day. Brief nods in the hallway, polite conversations about repairs or mail. It was as if the night we shared existed in a sealed box, tucked away from the routine of tenant and landlord. And yet I knew he knew. Every glance carried the weight of it. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if he thought of it as a transaction completed, or if he too felt the shift that had lodged itself in me. The truth was, I no longer knew where the boundary lay between necessity and choice. I had entered his apartment desperate for survival, but somewhere in that night, I had also confronted a loneliness I'd been carrying since long before the rent was overdue. It wasn't love. I knew better than to mistake it for that, but it wasn't emptiness either. It was something far more complicated. An arrangement that exposed the cracks in my independence and forced me to see parts of myself I had avoided. One evening, weeks later, I stood at my window watching the city lights flicker, thinking about the vows I once held sacred, vows of fidelity in a marriage that had collapsed under silence, vows to myself that I would never compromise who I was, no matter how difficult life became. Yet here I was, shaped by compromises I never imagined making. The question that haunted me wasn't whether Daniel had taken advantage of me. It was whether I had betrayed myself. Because in the quiet moments, when the noise of survival faded, I couldn't deny a truth that unsettled me more than anything else. A part of me didn't regret it. Infidelity isn't always measured by the breaking of promises to someone else. Sometimes it's the fracture of promises made to yourself. The ones you thought were unbreakable until survival, or desire, or sheer exhaustion made you test them. I still live in that apartment. The floors still creak, the pipes still rattle, and Daniel still walks the halls with the same calm authority. But every time I turn the key in the door, I know I'm carrying a story that doesn't fit neatly into categories of right or wrong, and maybe that's the hardest truth of all. Survival changes you. It reshapes the lines you swore you'd never cross. And once you cross them, you're never entirely the same again.